Some houses are just bad news. You can feel it as soon as you step foot inside. There's something about them that makes you want to get out as fast as you can. Well, there's some houses like this that aren't just bad vibes. They're straight up cursed. And if you don't leave fast enough, you might find yourself 6 feet under before you know it. So let's look at some of the most dangerous homes money can buy. But first, a warning. If you've already stayed in one of these homes, run. Madame Delphine McCarthy arrived in New Orleans in 1792 from France. She was young, beautiful, and married to a rich sugar baron, making her one of the elite members of society. At least that's how she saw herself. But here's the problem with seeing yourself as better than everyone else. It blinds you to your own flaws. And Madame Delphine had plenty of flaws. One being that she really liked hurting other people, especially the 16 people she had chained up in her mansion's dungeon, never letting them eat or drink enough so they would be weak and easier to control. Those unfortunate enough to be imprisoned by Madame Delphine were mostly women and children, and she seemed to take a special delight in tormenting them. If you weren't whipped, shackled to a wall, or starved, you could hear others being subjected to these punishments, their screams and cries echoing through the silent nights. But if you lived in New Orleans in the 1830s, hearing those screams wasn't easy. The locals could hear the victims calling out for help, but they didn't do much to stop it. In fact, they pretended they couldn't hear anything. Because of the social pressure, seeing Madame Delphine was part of high society, and talking about what went on in a house would ruin everyone's fun. It was easier to just ignore the screams and hoping they stopped eventually. Maybe they'd be quiet if they died. Sadly, that's exactly what happened. Some victims were beaten to death and left where they fell. Others slowly withered away from starvation and exposure, while some simply died of exhaustion. However, Madame Delphine's luck would soon run out. On April 10, 1834, a fire broke out in the mansion. No one knows how it started, although some believe Madame Delphine set it herself to cover up her crimes. What we do know is that firefighters arrived on the scene and made a grisly discovery. Inside the burning building were several injured people chained to the floor. Some were burned, others naked. Madame Delphine wasn't there, but her cook was, along with some family members. As soon as word got out that the people in the mansion were slaves and not free as Madame Delphine claimed, an angry mob formed outside. The people wanted to hang the cook, but he escaped. Then they turned their attention to Madame Delphine's house. They wanted to burn it down, but the fire had already done that for them. They found the bodies of 11 people in the roof. However, no one knows if those were the only victims. Some say there were more than a dozen bodies buried in the backyard. Fearing for her life, Madame Delphine fled town and would never return. But that doesn't mean she stopped haunting her former home. Even today, people report seeing her ghost there. If you think that sounds scary, wait until you hear about the next house. Just because you remove yourself from a cursed place doesn't mean the curse is over. Sometimes it follows you home. That's what happened to Helen Acton and her family. In the 1960s, they moved into a large brick house in Georgia, the perfect southern mansion. There was just one small problem. It was built on the site of a former slave plantation. The spirit of one of the slaves, a girl named Emily, didn't like that, and she made her presence known. One day Helen was sweeping the front porch when she felt a chill. Then she heard chains dragging metal moans. Helen assumed she was losing her mind until it happened again. This time she wasn't alone. Her daughter experienced strange things too. Dolls she hadn't moved mysteriously changed places. Things went missing and then reappeared days later. And Helen's rocking chair kept rocking back and forth, even though no one was sitting in it. Then there were the nightmares. Every night Helen dreamed that she was hanging from a tree, and her own daughter began dreaming of a little girl in a Victorian nightgown. Helen didn't want to believe in ghosts, but there was one incident that changed everything. Helen's husband was reading in his chair when suddenly the lights flickered and the temperature dropped. He looked over at his wife and said, "Did you turn the thermostat down?" "I haven't touched it," Helen replied. Just then, they heard chains dragging metal moans again. Helen turned to her husband and whispered, "I think we need to move." They put their house up for sale, but potential buyers had the same experience. During their showing, they would see the same rocking chair or feel an ice-cold handbrush against theirs. Eventually, the Actons sold the house for a huge discount and moved away. Some say they still hear the chains dragging. It isn't just old mansions that are cursed. Sometimes modern buildings can be cursed, too. That's what happened to one man in Texas when he moved into his new apartment. It looked great on the outside, but what happens on the inside? Well, let's ask the previous tenant. He'd moved in a few months before, and things were going well. He fixed up the place, put in a washer and dryer, and everything seemed hunky-dory. Until one day he came home to find his dog dead. He thought maybe his poor puppy had gotten into some poison or something. But when he looked around the apartment, he noticed something weird. There were tiny puncture marks all over the floor and walls. His dog must have been bitten by something, but there was no sign of a snake or any other animal. He decided to chalk it up to coincidence. After all, he thought, dogs die sometimes. It was only when things started disappearing that he got worried. First it was his TV, then it was his tools, and finally his car keys. Then the scratches appeared. They were everywhere, as if something were trying to claw its way out of the walls. He called the police, but they couldn't find anything. Finally, he decided he'd had enough. he packed his things and left the apartment. You don't have to live in a haunted house to become a ghost. Sometimes ghosts can make a house a haunted house. For example, take the case of Helen Viola. She lived in a home with her boyfriend and 2 friends. Helen had recently broken up with her fiancé, which had her pretty down. She felt like a failure. So when she learned that her friends were going to be out of town for the weekend, she invited her ex over for one last try at a relationship. But the night took a turn when Helen's ex got angry and pushed her to the ground. Startled, Helen fell backwards and hit her head on a fireplace poker. She didn't know how hard she'd fallen, but when she regained consciousness, she was lying in a pool of blood. Her ex panicked and called 911, but it was too late. Helen was already dead. Even though he hadn't meant to kill her, her ex was charged with murder. He was later acquitted, but that didn't bring Helen back. Still, sometimes love conquers all, even death. According to some reports, Helen's ghost still lives in that house. People have seen her walking around and even interacting with people. The question is she friendly or not? There's only one way to find out. Move into that house and ask her. Just kidding. Don't do that. Instead, read on to hear the story of another haunted house. The Amityville Horror is one of the most famous stories in modern history. George DeFeo shot and killed his entire family in their home. But to this day, no one knows why. Since then, rumors have circulated that the house is haunted by the ghosts of the DeFeo family. And there's evidence to support this. In 1977, one of the investigators working on the case came across a strange yellow glow coming from the house. He couldn't explain it. When he told the local priest, he advised him to leave it alone. And that's what he did. But others weren't so lucky. People have reported seeing the ghost of a young boy in the house, as well as hearing strange noises and feeling cold spots. Some believe that George's sister Dawn haunts the house. She was only 9 years old when she was murdered, and her ghost is said to appear in photographs taken at the house. If you want to see for yourself, then move right in. The house is for sale, but no one dares to buy it. Now watch Scary Things Caught on Google Maps or check out most haunted places in America.